Hello everyone, welcome to Washington Forum. This is Xiang Ling. Washington Forum is a platform that we engage broad and deep discussion on current affairs, policies on the Indo-Pacific areas, and also many of the international concerns. And so in today's forum, we're glad to invite Mr. Joseph Bosco to join us. Mr. Joseph Bosco is a member of the advisory board for Global Taiwan Institute, and he is also a senior fellow in Korean American Institute as well as Taiwan American Studies. And he was a former China country desk officer for the Office of Secretary of Defense in 2005 to 2006. And so he's a renowned senior China policy analyst, and he regularly writes on the Hills and to contribute his opinion to the legislation as well. So Mr. Bosco, thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Dr. Lee, and Sean, and great to see you again.
Great to see you. And so we talk about some of the very hot topics this week happens. And of course, one of the major things is Secretary Anthony Blinken called for all United Nations member states to strongly support Taiwan, to let them robustly participate in the UN system. So this language, robust, is very interesting because on October 22nd, last Friday, when the State Department released a statement talk about the State Department official meet with Taiwanese official to discuss about how to let Taiwan join UN system meaningfully. So this different language, meaningful as well as robust. How do you interpret this difference?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a substantive difference. There's a difference in tone, synonyms in English, but they're both good. They both present a picture of a relationship with Taiwan in the United States and in the West generally that is deepening and broadening. This is good. This is a wonderful development. Your previous speaker, Dr. Yu, described the revolutionary changes that the Trump administration made, and Secretary Pompeo's major role in that. He didn't say the role that he's played as an assistant to Secretary Pompeo. Miles Yu is a gem in the history of U.S.-China relations, and he made a wonderful contribution. I'm pleased to say that so far, in many ways, not all, the Biden administration is following the Trump administration's lead. And we now see, as you mentioned, the appeal to the United Nations to deepen relations with Taiwan, whether it's robust or meaningful. We'll take both. They're very good. And I hope that other countries in the United Nations, I know that many of the European countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, do see the merit of a better relationship with Taiwan. And hopefully that will spread to other countries in the UN system.
And since you have decades of studies on this China-Taiwan-U.S. relationships, and so can you elaborate a little bit, like for what kind of misinterpretation that China has been doing to the international society regarding about Taiwan issue cross-strait relationships?
It goes way back to Mao's days, and it goes back to the Nixon-Mao meetings where they developed the Shanghai Communique, which I have called the original sin of U.S.-China relations, because in that document, China declared unequivocally that Taiwan is part of China, and there's no arguing about it. The United States, on the other hand, promulgated a one-China policy, which is that although both sides at that time, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, said that Taiwan was part of China, it's up to the people of Taiwan to decide that, and that is yet to be determined. So China likes to conflate its one China principle with the U.S. one China policy and say that the U.S. and the rest of the international community agree with China's view that Taiwan is part of China. That is a clear distortion of history, and we need to combat that. And at every turn, every time China says, but you all agreed to the one China principle, we should say, no, we didn't. We agreed to a one China policy. And by the way, a one China policy which says that there's only one China in the world is fine, but there's also one Taiwan in the world. So, of course, China would bridle at the thought of one China, one Taiwan. But I think that's ultimately the way the United States policy will have to go.
But we also see at the same time Beijing's respond very strongly in terms of U.S. to encourage Taiwan to participate more in the UN system, right? And so even they talk about this is a 50 years anniversary for the UN's resolutions to bring back China's. And so how do you think this will evolve if China further, protest and put pressure on maybe for more European countries as well in the United States, forcing them to maybe even maybe roll back a little bit? How do you think it will evolve?
Well, as Dr. Yu said, we're talking about a battle of ideas, a battle of ideology and values. And to the extent that China says that Taiwan is part of China, it's saying it's not part of the Western system, it's not part of the Western values and democratic system. We need to resist that at every point, and that's where the countries in the United Nations have a role to play. If they will perceive Taiwan as being part of the normal international community, that is, either the democratic or democratizing parts of the international community, that will push back against China's pressures. Yes, China is going to object. They object at everything that helps Taiwan. In fact, in their anti-secession law, they object to Taiwan just doing nothing. If Taiwan doesn't move toward unification, not reunification because it was never part of People's Republic, if Taiwan simply does nothing, China objects to that and considers that
it's the mere existence of a separate
exactly.
entity.
And Xi Jinping says, this cannot go on from one generation to the next. Well, it has gone on, and it's going to go on because the people of Taiwan are not going to give up their democratic system, and the United States and other Western countries like Japan are not going to abandon Taiwan.
So since you talk about these international efforts to support Taiwan, so we know that even this week, President Biden announced that he will actually support more ASEAN countries for those Southeast Asian countries, right? They allocate more than $102 million to further enhance the relationship between these ASEAN countries, and money will actually go into economic as well educations and technology programs. So do you think this strategy will work? Because I know the Chinese government also put a lot of money to other ASEAN countries as well through their Belt and Road initiative. So it's kind of like competitions for money, right? That many of the ASEAN countries can turn it into like a strategies, like a European country. They want the U.S. Money, but they also want the China market. Do you think this will be the trend?
Well, it's a fact that China, the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives by China have been offering economic stimulation, economic benefits to these countries to draw them into China's orbit. That's been going on a long time. Without competition, the U.S. has been on the sidelines. Now, with the kind of program that Biden's talking about where we're going to send some money to these countries, it gives us a little leverage, it gives them leverage to resist China. It's not a matter of taking Chinese money or getting and having nothing. It's a matter of taking Chinese money, maybe taking some Western money too, or either one or the other.
At least have a leverage, influence there.
Right, have a choice.
I see. And do you think the Quad, the India and Australia, Japan, United States will also enhance their relationship, have more military joint exercise to counter communist China's more aggression in the Indo-Pacific region?
I do, and I think the Quad is an excellent initiative. I think it started, it may have started even before Trump, but Trump really got it moving, and now the Biden administration is expanding it even more. This is great. The Quad, any kind of international organizations or international cooperation which recognizes the China threat is a good development. So that the Quad is excellent. The newest development that the Biden administration has initiated is the AUKUS, Australia, Japan, and the UK and the US. This is great. This is also an important development. So you see kind of around the world an awakening. It's very late and way too late. It's been going on for generations. China's expanded its domain economically, politically, diplomatically, militarily, and the rest of the world simply sat by and said, well, as long as we can trade with you and we're getting good economic benefits. We don't care about those things. They're now seeing they must care about them. These are a threat to the security of those individual countries. They're a threat to the region. They're a threat to the world.
But at the same time, even though many policymakers, legislators would understand the threat of this aggression from China, but many people still worry the strategic ambiguity is not just about Taiwan. So in many aspects, they want to have collaboration with China, for example, in climate issues. And actually, Senator Rubio actually just warned, saying that this may be a dangerously delusional for the Biden administration, because how can you trust the promise from the Chinese government? Do you agree on that?
I certainly do, and they have violated their commitments on climate change already. They've been violating them. They violate almost every international commitment they make. But worse than that is they use the promise of cooperation as leverage against other issues. For many years it was North Korea. Every time China did something wrong on human rights or trade or South China Sea, and the US government would try to crack down on it, the answer would be from many people in the foreign policy establishment, but we need China's help on North Korea. We shouldn't do this. Don't press them on human rights. Don't worry about trade. Don't worry about South China Sea. We need them. They've never delivered anything on North Korea. Now it's climate change. Yes, don't bother China about all these issues because they're going to help us on climate change. First of all, it's not a matter of helping us. If in fact climate change is as bad as everyone says, it's a threat to the whole world, including China and its 1.4 billion people. They're not doing us a favor when they comply with their obligations under the Paris Accord. They're supposedly helping their own people as well. We've got to change the mindset that we are beholden to China in so many ways. We are not beholden to them any more than they're beholden to us. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, I also quite agree that the climate issue may be just another token that the Chinese government is bargaining with the international society. But one very, very surprising factor that I see is Xi Jinping's role. Recently, I saw analysis from Professor Chen Xiaonong, and he talked about in Chinese government recently had actually a national directive to restrict energy usage and cause a blackout. And actually one of the reasons is because Xi Jinping promised United States he would do some major actions to help the climate change. And so to me, it's actually surprising that the Xi Jinping is the most important unpredictable factor that actually may cause some harm to the China economy if China just have to follow a little bit on his promise on the climate change.
Yeah, they're having some serious internal energy problems, no doubt about it. It's not just because of compliance with the Paris Accord. It's because they've mismanaged part of their energy industry. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the dichotomy between the regulators of prices, of oil prices, and the regulators of delivery of energy prices to the people, and they're uncoordinated, and it's caused serious dislocations. So he's not doing us a favor by meeting his climate obligations. It's very important for China's economy as well to get these things straightened out. But he is expanding on, I guess they just gave approval for 100 more coal-fired plants. They're relying very heavily on coal, even though they've committed not to do so.
Yeah. So back to the Taiwan issues. And right now, we already know the Chinese government has escalated the tension, right, with flying more than 150 war planes into Taiwan's the airspace identification zone. So what do you think will be the next potential escalation without military attack on Taiwan? Will be some other potential ways that CCP can escalate its tension?
There's a range of options they have to take against Taiwan, not just a full-scale invasion, which is probably unlikely, but there are the islands. They can try to take over one of the islands. They can do cyber warfare. They're already doing political and psychological warfare against Taiwan. So there's a number of ways they can escalate, and they can go back to the flights. They have suspended them for the last couple of weeks, I think, since that 158. But they can go back to those. There are many ways they can increase the pressure to see what kind of concessions they can get either from Taiwan or from the United States. They want us to stop sending high-level dignitaries and officials there.
Yeah.
They want us to do lots of things. Now, the Biden administration has hinted that it was going to invite Taiwan to the Conference for Democracy in December. It has also said it's considering changing the name of TECRO, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representation Office, to Taiwan Representation Office, which is simpler and more logical.
It's very symbolic effort.
It is indeed, but as somebody said, with Taiwan, symbolism is substance. All these things matter. So we'll see if the Biden administration follows through on those commitments. Another thing it can do is to invite Taiwan to participate in RIMPAC, the naval exercise, which it did invite China to participate in a few years ago, and then last year said no, but Taiwan ought to be part of that. Taiwan should be part of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief exercises between the U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard and Taiwan institutions. There are many things that we can do to combat, to resist the pressures that China is putting on Taiwan.
Do you think actually U.S. should enhance military training for the Taiwanese people? Because right now we saw the Taiwan government, the President China, for the first time acknowledge that the U.S. Marine was training Taiwan militaries.
Right. I think that's excellent, and that should be expanded for sure. We should be training not only on Taiwan but at sea, as I say, and in the air. We should have joint exercises of Taiwanese and American and Japanese and other forces in a number of ways to demonstrate that the U.S. is really committed to the defense of Taiwan, and to the extent that we're even training, not only training, but exercising with them. These are important steps that will enhance not only Taiwan's security, but U.S. national security.
And since you mentioned a moment ago about a potential way China escalate the tension is actually maybe taking some of the islands surround the Taiwan main island. So I remember the Japan defense minister actually mentioned that one way that China take an invasion of Taiwan without major deployment of troops is like Russians taking over Crimea.
Crimea, yeah.
Yeah. So do you think China will actually really progress towards this direction?
I certainly think it's in China's intentions and plans. The real question is, what do they think they can get away with? If they believe that the Biden administration will not intervene if they take over an island, then they will do it, because why not? But if they really believe that the Biden administration will intervene, will send U.S. forces to help Taiwan defend, then they have to think, could this lead to an escalation? Could this lead to an all-out war between the U.S. and China? For all their faults and evils, and they are evil, I do not think the Chinese communists are suicidal. They do not want an all-out war with the United States. It would mean the destruction of their economy, and it would mean the destruction of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's the last thing they want. But they're just not sure how much they can get away with, how strong U.S. resistance will be. I think under the Trump administration, they had a pretty serious idea that Trump would do something. In fact, Trump said it. And he was asked on Fox News, what would you do if China attacked Taiwan? He said, I can't discuss that now, but China knows what I'm going to do. They know what and the way he said it was, I'm going to respond with force, and they'd better not do it. And I think they understood that. With Biden, we'll see if Biden did say it a couple of weeks ago. He said, we have a commitment to Taiwan and we'll endorse it. But then his staff and the foreign policy establishment said he didn't really mean that. There's no change in U.S. policy. That's the third time that's happened now under President Bush, President Trump, and President Biden. Each time one of them has made a statement signifying a strong U.S. commitment to Taiwan. The staff people would say, well, we haven't changed our policy.
So this is actually like an intrinsic problem in the United States political system, right? It's always the implementation of policy is always different from what maybe the leader talk about.
Well, it all started back, the idea of strategic ambiguity started in the 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis. when President Lee Teng-hui wanted to go to his Cornell reunion, and the U.S. said, no, we won't give you a visa because China would be upset. And the U.S. Congress and the American people said, that's crazy. This man went to Cornell. He should be able to go to his reunion. So we changed it, and President Clinton gave a visa to Lee Teng-hui. And Lee went to Cornell for his reunion. How did China react? They shot missiles toward Taiwan.
So that's actually a strategy they haven't implemented for a while, because China haven't really fired missile against Taiwan recently, right, in the recent years.
Well, the way we responded to the missiles was we sent the U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, through the Taiwan Strait. And of course, China objected violently. What are you doing? These are our waters. And the answer was, it was a weather diversion. We had to do it. So this was a very weak answer, unfortunate. But the follow-up to that was, and this is where we get into the strategic ambiguity, the Chinese officials met with the Assistant Secretary at the time, Joseph Nye, and asked him directly, what would you do? What would the U.S. do if we attacked Taiwan?
Very straightforward.
This is a straightforward question. This is 1995. The Taiwan Relations Act went into effect in 1979. Instead of Mr. Nye saying, well, we have obligations to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act, he said, we don't know and you don't know. It would depend on the circumstances. So he thought that was a very clever, he explained to us at CSIS once, he said, well, I wanted to avoid the confusion that led to the Korean War, where the U.S. kind of said we weren't going to defend Taiwan or South Korea, and so North Korea attacked. He said he wanted to avoid that by this ambiguous answer. Well, that's fine. It deterred China from doing anything at that time, but it encouraged China to say, aha, there is a possibility that with the right circumstances that the U.S. will stand by and not defend Taiwan.
Just watching.
And so what have they been doing for the last 20 years? Building anti-ship ballistic missiles, attack submarines, all these different measures to increase the pressure and convince the U.S. that we would be crazy to intervene in a war to defend Taiwan. That's where we are.
Yeah.
It's called strategic ambiguity, and it was originally called constructive ambiguity. But I think destructive ambiguity is probably a better answer, because it hasn't deterred China from planning to attack Taiwan.
So do you think that even inside the administration there are also controversial or different arguments regarding this strategic ambiguity? We saw a report talk about Kerry's opinions on climate issue versus Jake Sullivan's position on China. There are some difference. Do you have similar observations?
Oh yeah, I think Kerry is very much of the accommodationist school of thought. He's demonstrated that throughout his career. He believes that we should be nice to China, and they will be nice to us, and they will cooperate on climate, which is the ultimate existential threat in his mind. But he said when his position was first announced, he said then, we will not trade climate progress for other issues like human rights. We will not trade them off. They stand alone. Climate change is so important. And yet, this past week, he has been doing exactly that. And that's where Jake Sullivan has pushed back and said, no, we're not going to make concessions in other areas just to get their cooperation on climate change, which they're obligated to do anyway.
So do you think actually some of the important issues like human rights issues actually will be one of the most vulnerable positions that the communist regime have? If you actually stand very strongly on these issues, it will actually put more leverage when the Biden administration discuss or have a dialogue with Chinese counterparts.
I think you've put your finger on the greatest weapon that the West has against communist China. Their greatest vulnerability is human rights and values. We simply do not tell the story strongly enough to our business community, to our think tanks, to our scholars. Look, we're dealing with a regime, just as Dr. Yu was talking about, that is antithetical to everything that we believe in, everything we stand for. It's like we're confronting the Soviet Union again, or Nazi Germany. That's the kind of regime we have in communist China. They have concentration camps with the Uyghurs. They crack down on Hong Kong against their international commitments. They take over islands in the South China Sea. You know, they do everything wrong, everything aggressive and hostile to the West, and we still have people in the West who say, I think we can do business with them. Yes, they can do some business. They can have their trade and have their corporate interests in China and make big profits for a small number of people. But we're giving up our entire arsenal of values against China, which we ought to be deploying. And I believe that, and haven't talked to all 1.4 billion Chinese, but I've talked to enough there and in various contexts to know that the Chinese people are no different from the Taiwanese people, the American people, the East European people. Basically, they want to be left alone by governments and regimes. They want to pursue their lives. They want the freedom to express themselves. They want to help choose their leaders. All the same kinds of values that people all around the world want. And therefore, if we were to appeal, as we did in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we appealed, Ronald Reagan went directly to the Russian people and said, you're living under an evil empire, we're going to help you. Keep on struggling. We're not going to go to war, have World War III, but we're going to use all of our tools, all of our instruments to help you resist this tyranny that you're living under. And it worked. It took a long time, but the Berlin Wall fell. We did not have World War III, and now, you know, that threat is gone.
Yeah. So actually, it's an important issue that you raised, that actually more international leaders should actually talk to Chinese people directly, telling them you are living under the evil empire, right? You have to have the courage to step forward, to resist the regime. I think hopefully it will happen.
Well, they don't lack courage. You remember Tiananmen Square. I mean, there were millions of Chinese, both in Beijing and in cities all over China, who were very peacefully demonstrating, just saying, let's have some reform. We don't want to overthrow the government, overthrow the system. We just want to have liberalization. And look how they were treated.
Yeah. I think nowadays even this kind of simple wish become a luxury idea now under the Xi Jinping administration.
Yeah, he's going back to Maoist days.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Joe, and thank you for contributing to your very, very deep thinking on this issue and convey such a very positive message for Chinese people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. And thank you, everyone, for watching our Washington Forum. And hopefully in the future, Washington Forum will continue to provide a very broad and deep discussion on many global affair issues, especially focused on Indo-Pacific regions. And thank you very much. This is Sean Ling.